Hey, welcome to the Elle Russ Show. My name is Elle Russ, and I am a #1 best-selling author and master coach. My intention is to inspire, educate, and motivate you with weekly content featuring amazing guests and solo episodes. Visit my website, elleruss.com, to learn more about me, my courses, free masterclasses, partner discounts, and much more. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, today Dr. David Russ is with us. He is a registered dietitian nutritionist and also has a Ph.D. in public health. He's got a great recovery story. He's dealt with hundreds and probably thousands at this point, people struggling with eating disorders and anything around food. And he's developed an amazing app that can be very helpful in anyone's journey, struggling with kind of food stuff in the health space. So welcome to the show, David. How are you?
Super today. I'm excited to be here and let's build together.
Yeah, I haven't heard it yet completely in its entirety. I would love to hear your personal recovery story yourself with the challenges you faced in life. And then, wow, what a resume on to, UCLA, becoming an expert in this field. So tell us, what happened? Where was your fall from grace?
Yeah, thank you for that. I have one of those stories where I have truly got to live two lifestyles in one lifetime. I am from West Los Angeles, and I definitely gravitated toward counterculture pretty early on, high school. I did go to USC as an undergrad, and this was in the late 90s. There was a rave scene movement. My mother was a hippie, and I really just felt connected to any sort of energy that challenged the mainstream narratives. And for me, that included dancing and connecting with other people who had that sort of opt-out energy. But of course, that scene was filled with a lot of substances, and it was normal. It was
a lot of other
thing.
Kind of opt-outs.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of routes toward opting out. And it was all normal and it was all fun. I just grew up around a bunch of other kids who got into all that same stuff. If I look at the data set of, my group of friends, in high school, like a quarter of them are dead, a quarter of them are still strung out using, and a couple people ended up bouncing out and getting really awesome, successful, resilient lives. And there's probably some people that I fell out of touch with, but I was definitely one of the lucky ones that had a pretty low bottom and was able to bounce back and build a meaningful life. And for me, that all started in 2006. I had some pretty serious health challenges and some legal troubles. And, in my case, I had explored some different avenues of new chapters. And, when I got into what we call recovery, I will say that nutrition, exercise, sunlight, sleep, the physical dimension of wellness was extremely impactful for me. I don't say that to suggest that it'll have the same magnitude for everyone else, but in my own personal journey, when I got into drinking water, eating vegetables, getting sunlight, lifting weights, and things like that, my whole world changed.
Yeah.
Of course, there was other factors, other variables, but it pointed to my career. It was very obvious that there was something significant there for me. People were asking me for help, and I just listened to the call. So I was able to go back and finish my undergrad, get ready for a master's degree, become a dietitian. I did research on nutrition for substance abuse, and started a practice helping people that were in recovery from addictions, eating disorders, depression, anxiety, trauma. So I've always done really niche work with people that have extremes and have really challenging cases. So working at the intersection of behavioral health disorders. And it's always been really exciting, sort of being a trailblazer in some ways and trying to do the work that other people aren't doing. And my private practice is Nutrition in Recovery, founded 2012. I was always into academics, so I got the call a few years after that to do more. And I did a doctorate at UCLA, and I studied adverse childhood experiences, my PhD is in community health sciences, so there was some social science to it. I have a minor in health psychology, so I learned a lot about integrating biological sciences with social and psychological sciences and bringing stuff all together. So I've really enjoyed being a scholar and thinking about these tricky intersectional areas. And I've continued working one-on-one with people. So in the last 11 years, I've worked with, you know, over 1,000 people one-on-one. And I've been able to write stuff and publish stuff. And then more recently, I built the Wise Mind Nutrition app, which is kind of where my energy's at now. But in a nutshell, I'll say this: I love the struggle. I love people that are in recovery, whatever that word means to them. I'm not attached to any definitions there. I just like helping people that are having challenges find new chapters to step into and just being a part of that transformation.
I love all of that and I want to get into it, but you did kind of gloss over your bottom. Can you tell us what was the moment or what was going on in your life? Do you mind, or do you not want to get into that? That's fine too. I would love to hear that. I mean, from perspective of your daily life when you're like, this is shit, I have to change this. Like there was a moment, obviously, when you were like, something has got to be different. Who
Sure.
were you at that point? What was going on in your head? And how low was the bottom there for you to go, shit, did people help you? Did you do it yourself? Do you mind sharing your
Yeah, no, I'm
personal
an open
insights?
book.
Great.
There's times
And
when
open it up, David.
I just put it all out there. And there's other times when I tread lightly. I certainly don't want to be the person that spends the rest of my life milking my story, but it's pretty gnarly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
get into
yeah.
it because I think that there's people who might hear that and this or might send this to someone who is in that situation. Either way, I think it's always important we can see where someone was.
Okay, I'm just gonna lean in. I'll just tell you the truth. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. I'm a product of the original opioid crises
Hmm.
in the early 2000s. So this was a time when, you could get 80 milligram Oxycontins for cheap, and we had fentanyl lollipops and patches. And I mean, it was fast money and, late nights. It was party culture that turned into just drug culture. So my story involved the hardest of the hards, the stimulants, the ups, the downs, the lefts, the rights. And I got into um, an awful car accident, which was my first case. I had a felony DUI. There was great bodily harm involved. Someone was hurt in an accident that I was responsible for. She's actually doing quite well now, and I kept in touch with her, to be honest, because I had restitution to pay. And after I paid off the money, I contacted her, and we had a deep, deep conversation. And it was one of the most moving things that ever happened to me in my life. It was someone that I had injured in a car accident that I fell asleep. And it must have been 8 years before I paid off all the restitution. And I was sober, and I contacted her, and we talked about spirituality. It was like one of the most moving experiences of my life. So
Can
there
I
was
would
that.
like to, I'd like to
Yeah,
stop you there because you said something
yeah.
that kind of just, hmm. So one of the things I talk about in my second book about shame and how shame can disable your confidence. You got to get flat with it no matter what it is. And when I talk about that, I always say, look, for one person, it could be they hurt someone in a drunk driving accident, went to jail or whatever, and they're ashamed of that. Or it could be someone who's got some moles on their back and they're ashamed. No one's shame. It's
Hmm.
not better than the other. It's just that it affects everyone differently. But what I love that I'm hearing now is like, you're the example of the guy who hurt someone many years ago and to be able to talk about it with no shame, to share it. I mean, I'm sure there's a lingering in there. Can you talk a little bit about how, I mean, that must have been tough to get over and to have the conversation with her at the end. We all know how well it ended, thank God. But like, can you talk a little bit about that shame that happens?
Yeah, there's actually a lot there. And I'll just sneak preview.
Yeah.
There was another case after that. Okay, like I got into more trouble.
Oh
That
wow.
was not
This
my
is this is
wake up
this is like
moment.
the best drama I've ever fucking watched. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, yeah. Like that was like the introduction to the bottom. Um, but what's interesting about that story is that I had a lot of actual resentment, toward that scenario and even toward that woman because she was actually a secretary for a civil law firm. And there wasn't like a significant injury. Okay. It was like the airbag came out and like it like cut her in the face. Okay. Um, and I was like really angry for many years because they sued me for money that I didn't have. Right. Like I was
Sure.
24 or 23 at the time. And, I was a student at a university here in Los Angeles, a private university, USC. And I think I had a cool looking car and they saw me like this was an opportunity for them to really come after me. And it's so funny because, I definitely had some shame about what happened and especially toward the end. But in those interim few
Sure.
years when it was like open cases, I remember being that like sort of
That
angry
victim.
victim, you
Yes.
know,
I'm
in the
so
whole
glad you
thing.
mentioned that because, okay, you're gonna have to come on again. There's too many things, but one of the things also when people get sober after something like this, and they might get sober and that's great, but then they never get flat with stuff, and I guess we would
Mhm.
call them dry drunks or whatever. They're still like a victim about
That's
it.
right.
Like whatever the
That's right.
incident that sent them in, had to go to rehab, they had to get sober. Now they're still pissed about it. And so I kind of can see having resentment in that victimy, druggy kind of like brain and world at 24. And
Yes.
then obviously that, yeah. So anyway, just so interesting how it can be both or one or the other.
Yeah. And it played out, I ended up getting into trouble one more time and um I spent some time away in 2006. And yeah, I remember like just being pissed about all the circumstances, There was police officers that raided my house without a warrant. There was this woman who was suing me who didn't even get hurt. And I had that like kind of victim mentality. And then when I really entered into what I want to call recovery in September of 2006, I really did have some remarkable spiritual shifts to where, like, all the people that owed me money, I let them go. All the stories that I used to tell about who I was, I let it go. I learned how to let resentments go, and I learned how to be a clean slate and to basically, start my life over and stop looking back and start looking forward. And that's when I got into health. And wow, what a transformation it was for me. And yeah, I got sober in 2006 with 5 felony convictions.
Mm,
I had never had a real job and I had $80,000 worth of debt. How about that?
that's a doozy.
Yep,
And but you're such an amazing 180.
it's true.
And also, who better to help people from the depths of despair to do
Mhm.
a 180 than you? Um, Before we get into a lot of the health space, so how's the sobriety journey gone for you? I mean, because at first I know some people it's like they can't even be near stuff, right? And then you sort of move through the world. How was that journey? Was it easy for you? Was it tough? Were you like reluctantly sober for the first couple of years? Like give us a little bit of it's been obviously
Yeah,
for many years now, but give us a
great
rundown on how that's
question.
gone.
Yeah, I think that for people like myself who I think would be considered severe in terms of like what is known as a substance use disorder, the statistics are pretty low and it does kind of require that someone really embark upon, a new way of life entirely. And that was definitely a necessity for me. And what I mean by that is like, I definitely had to kind of sever ties with people, build a new social network, got active in recovery and in meetings. And what ends up happening for myself and a lot of others is, recovery is very expansive because it now opens up the world. A lot of new things are possible that just weren't possible before. I'm able to be helpful to people. I'm able to contribute. to the stream of life, and the whole world opens up and it's expansive. But invariably, recovery can also become very contractive for people because, you start to feel like, you see the lens through the world of, recovery, and you only hang out with people in recovery, and you start to judge people that aren't
Yeah.
in recovery. And then we start fighting with other people that are in recovery, how they do it. And it
Or people
almost,
getting addicted to recovery, like
yeah, exactly.
getting into that
Exactly.
thing too. We're now, I mean, that is kind of like a joke a little bit sometimes. And look, bless AA and all of those programs. They've saved lives, many lives of people that I know. But people get into that, let's say, maybe they're not doing too much work outside of it. And you get a bunch of addicts, some fresh, who then suddenly are thinking, you know what I mean? It's no different than anyone who same thing with health coaching. Get into paleo primal health, you realize what a game changer it is, how many things it solves, and then you want to go
Mhm.
proselytize it to everybody, and
That's
no
right.
one's ready. Just shut it. Let people come to you, right? So it can
That's right.
become that thing as well, right?
Yep, and that's my story. And that definitely happened to me, and I see it happening to young people that come up in recovery. And the way that I've kind of made peace with it is that there's a necessary rigidity for some people to get free,
Yes.
right? But at some point, right, like I didn't, get free to live my life rigid. And so it took me quite a while, to kind of grow up and stop caring so much what other people do, stop trying to, like you said, convert others to my ways of being and my ways of thinking. And I do think that a lot of that came from, you know, just growing up age wise, but also the PhD program was very helpful to study the way different people think and just being able to read scientific literature. But it's really happened a lot in the last few years, having a daughter, starting a family, and just seeing how cognitive rigidity just doesn't always help with interpersonal relationships and societal health, right? You could see the way that, bipartisan politics really like divides the community. I'm able to see what's happened in the nutrition world, in the eating disorder world, and just able to see how, cognitive rigidity
Yes.
prevents people from living full and meaningful lives. And I was able to see many years ago that my own personal recovery, while extremely life changing and something I would always want to hold near and dear, had lent itself to a level of restrain,
Yeah.
like restrictedness that I've tried to outgrow a little bit, and it's been very, very fruitful for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's the same thing in the health space, or particularly like anything that has an elimination of foods. Like, so let's say it's keto, and then people are on some thread, and like someone posts that they had an apple, and people are like, "Oh, I'm gonna throw it out of ketosis." Eat the apple. Were you
Yeah,
craving the apple?
yeah.
Enjoy the apple, everybody. Oh, you're paleo. You had a piece of French bread in Paris. F off. You're fine. Again, it's this rigidity. Who are you? I've had it happen to me because, of course, I wrote a book called Paleo Thyroid Solution. I'm like, fifth
Mm,
person in the world certified in it. I'll go for a piece of like Danish rye bread and take a bite, and someone will go, "Oh, I thought you were paleo."
right.
You're like, you know what? Come. What are we? It's on both sides. Like, oh, you're so healthy. It's the blaming the people. Oh, have the donut, Janice, at work. So, we're getting a lot of that, right? It's like you've got to have a thick skin if you are going to be in this world and um, be a little bit off the mainstream in that sense. Like, I've never been a drinker, so I'm always getting questioned about it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, not that I've
Yep.
never had a drink. I have. I just can count the number of times I've even been buzzed, like on my fingers and toes, and I'm 50.
Got it.
You know what I mean? So I just don't like it. And the questions I get, they're like, would you have a problem with
Yep.
I have noticed, at least from my perspective as a non-drinker, that at least drinkers can't understand why you don't drink. They don't understand it. Where I've also been in California for 30 years, been around a ton of stoners. Never heard a stoner be like, come on, just one more joint. I'll roll you a joint. Come on. No, no, no. Three
Right.
for one. I've never heard peer pressure actually ever with that drug for some reason. But
Huh.
then, or question if someone says no thanks, and I go, oh, wait, you don't smoke? You've never smoked weed? Well, you don't like it? Like, it's so strange to me. So on the other side, I've always had this perspective of these drinkers, and it's an interesting thing. I don't know. I mean, maybe drinking was your thing and you know what I'm talking about, but that's a weird way to live in this world. And I don't even have a quote problem with drinking, right? So I can only imagine having one, and then now everyone's questioning everything. And it's even worse.
It's funny you say that. I think about those first few years of not drinking and like how much energy there was about having to explain myself or fit into social context. But now that I haven't, taken a drink for over 17 years, I don't feel like I ever have to explain myself to anyone. It just like it's
Yeah.
just part of who I am now, right?
Hmm.
Um, which is super cool. But yeah, alcohol's been normalized and so has sugar, right? So
Yes.
if anyone, those are,
The two big
uh,
addictions that are causing the worst problems here, right? We've got the type 2 diabetes epidemic and just metabolic effery. And then, listen, we've got the other, right? Like a lot of drunk driving accidents still, so
that's right. That's right. And they're normalized. The big industries definitely control the narratives around them and have ways of influencing public discourse around alcohol and sugar. And I would even argue coffee and caffeine. I would.
yeah, sure. How, let's, before we get into like your app and some of the other things that you have to offer here in terms of expertise, let's just gloss over a few of the eating disorder compartments because there was one that came up recently I had really never heard of, and I didn't understand it, but I understood it. Just like I don't understand having OCD, but I can understand, a little bit
Right.
like what it would be
Right.
like. So that was something called like food aversion, where people are just, kids grow up, they're a little picky, but then it becomes like a thing where they literally won't eat then if so, then this can be detrimental. Can you touch on that? And then also sort of maybe some questions if an audience member themselves or a family member either aren't sure if their kid is like anorexic or bulimic. Like, can you give some tip-offs for some of these things so that we could be aware to get your help and know where to go if, in fact, this is happening to us or someone in our family?
Yes. I love talking about eating disorders. I have so much to say. I want to just quickly double click on a point you made about people digging their heels into positions, right? You said keto or paleo. I do think that that phenomenon is very heightened in the era of algorithms and social media. It
Yep.
does seem like people, um, you know, need to take a really firm point of view about something in order to get attention. And people have learned that if you are very absolute about something, you'll get people that agree and people that disagree. And I've really noticed that quite a bit, that a lot of people that grew large followings, what we now call influencers online, sort of dug their heels in a very firm stance about health somewhere. And then now, fast forward a few years, they've backed off and said, you know what, like you were saying, like I don't really necessarily do that anymore 3 years later, right? So I'm a big fan of
Or just
you,
being open to like you don't have to identify and just be that thing. You could follow, like, I know people that for reasons like epilepsy or something have to follow keto or low carb. But other people that do it in general because it makes them feel good, they shouldn't feel guilty when they're in France to have a bite. Or again, that, hey, it's okay. How's your year looking? How's your
that's
week?
right.
How's your month? Not this, I broke a rule. You know what I
That's
mean?
right. That's right. And so that being said, this newer sort of eating disorder that you're referring to, RFID, avoidant and restrictive food intake disorder, has really like risen in its incidence and prevalence in recent years. And there's so much that we don't know about it. And I'll cover some of the things that we do know and some of the stuff that I see clinically. But I suspect that we're going to find out a lot more about what's going on biologically with avoidant and restricted food intake disorder and how it is similar and also very different from some of the other eating disorders that are out there. So, for anyone that's new to eating disorders, there's three, commonly accepted EDs that have been recognized in the DSM-5. We have anorexia nervosa, and there's two types there. There's a restrictive type, which is, commonly co-occurring with OCD symptoms or perfectionistic traits, and very much genetic in some ways. We have bulimia nervosa, which I think a lot of people assume is just vomiting, but there are other ways that people purge to connect to a binge. It could be through laxatives or through excessive exercise. I've known people that go on drug runs with stimulants,
Mhm.
etc. And then in the last 10 years, we have a recognized binge eating disorder, which I think has the most debate because, people kind of clump all the eating disorders together and talk about eating disorders broadly. But there are a lot of cases where people that have binge eating disorder have a lot of overlap with those that have anorexia nervosa, those that have bulimia. But there's cases where it's very, very different. And this is when you get into addiction like eating and some of the controversies there that we can always come back to if we have time. But then there's a couple other, unspecified eating disorders. And, some people put night eating syndrome in there, which other people see as more of a sleep related disorder. But it's definitely related to eating disorder. Some people put food addiction into an unspecified eating disorder. And then now we have RFID, which is relatively new, and a lot more research is happening here. And this is, like you said, a lot of times kids are called picky eaters. And this is probably the instance where that goes another step. And what you get are aversions that are very strongly pronounced. And, we see this often with kids that are on the spectrum. A lot of the aversions come from like sensory or tactile experiences that are very, very difficult. There are some theories about RFID that some of it comes from trauma. So, for example, I worked with a client for many years that had difficulty drinking certain types of liquids that were a certain consistency, like milk. And after doing some work together, we found out that there was, like a vomiting that occurred next related to a milk when he was a kid
Mm.
that was like life threatening, and because of that traumatic experience, he built an aversion to that substance to basically stay safe. And I like to use a trauma lens when I look at the world. I try not to overuse it and abuse it the way some people do, but there's a whole world of what we call adverse food related experiences. And so, for example, if a kid is growing up and parents are going through a divorce and they get into a huge fight on the night that they were eating green beans, right? You can imagine that if the plates are flying
Yeah.
and the green beans are on the plate, right? Like
Right.
the mind and the nervous system might subconsciously store a negative association with the green beans. Um,
David, that reminds me of a story of someone having sort of like people having issues surrounding like money or attaining wealth, whether they feel deserve it, etc. And the guy like was young and saw people get like a family member get murdered over money. Again, like a thing
yep,
that you would go, money's bad, get fucking murdered for it. Like I'm not gonna, you know what I
that's
mean?
right.
So yeah,
That's
this is
right.
making it makes sense.
Yeah, I like taking the developmental perspective, and trying to understand where some of those seeds were planted and how they could be very, very sticky. Another example could be, if a loving mother or parent just wants their kid to eat nutritious food and the kid doesn't want it, and then there's just like you could tell there's emotional charge in the family, and uh you know mom's upset, parents are fighting, like you're starting to attach food to a lot more potent emotions, right? And so this is certainly something that can confer risk for multiple forms of disordered eating, but it's one perspective on RFID. It's not the only. Other perspectives include the presence of ultra processed foods in the food environment, to where the food that's being produced by large corporations, so the chicken nuggets, the pizza, the packaged snack cakes, all the Nova 4 classified ultra processed foods, they just taste too good. to the point where it teaches the brain what to expect. The dopamine response is too much.
Yep.
So you can't expect a 10-year-old to want to eat food that gives them no neurochemical reward, you
Right.
know? And so, yeah, the food environment is a contributing factor. There's probably some biological factors, related to the trigeminal nerve and, some of the other tactile stuff that I think we're only starting to scratch the surface. But as with most disorders, I would say that it's usually not a single cause. It's when there are multiple risk factors present and they all sort of come together. And then, if you add in pressure from a family, now you enter the family dynamics and the family system, you can get some pretty tricky cases, and they can definitely lead to malnourishment and a lot of challenges. What I've seen is challenges in the whole family, the parents needing support and it being a really difficult thing to overcome. But there are certainly ways to be creative and to help expand not just the palate, but the range of nutrients that someone intakes. But yeah, it's a growing problem, and we do see it a lot clinically. It's definitely something that I or and people like myself can help with. But usually, it takes a little bit of while. It takes a little bit of work. It's not easy.
You spoke earlier about how when you were in the other life you lived, the sort of the extremes, right?
Mhm.
That kind of mentality of these extremes. And what is that about? Like, there's those people, whether it's food or whether it's an addiction, it's like either they're sober and like at the gym doing wheatgrass shots, or they're like just smoking weed all day. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or right, like the all or nothing.
Yes.
As someone who has a PhD, it's got like give us the inner working of a brain. If someone's out there and they feel they're an all or nothing, or some of their, that kind of extremes,
Yes.
can they do, or what can they start to look at in their lives to get maybe more of
Yep.
an, I mean, I'm not saying that will allow them to like have a drink again, but what
Right.
I mean?
Well, my take on it is that, extremes lead to extremes. And so sometimes when someone has a susceptibility to extremes, maybe they're drawn to, going on a pretty, pretty invested diet, or trying to, run a marathon, or they're gonna, um, have relational dynamics that are extreme. Um, that the initial sort of extreme can then lead to other extremes as the pendulum swings in the other direction. So I just want to start with that by saying that sometimes the people that are the most drawn to extremes, right, it kind of creates a cycle of more extremes after that. I do try to normalize neuro and behavioral extremes by just, considering that a lot of it is biological. There are cases where good therapy can get someone to be less extreme, but a lot of times people have, extreme swings in their neurochemistry, right? For example, there's certain disorders, bipolar as one example, where the extremes almost can't be um, fully addressed without, medical intervention. And I'm talking about pharmaceuticals in some cases. I'm not a prescriber, so I don't know much there. But I think my best answer to your question is that using that trauma informed lens, I do think that early life adversity, whether it be stress, PTSD, complex PTSD, does set up the the mind to be more rigid and to be more extreme. And if you go back to my own case, right, my own case study, um, I wasn't rigid until I had a lot of challenges and I was like almost faced with life or death. My life was on the line. And as a result of, what I had been through and starting my life over, being a product of the criminal justice system, I became extreme. I became extreme about recovery. I became a bodybuilder. I became extreme. You know what I
Chicken
mean?
and broccoli. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. All the way in. I did the thing. And if we were to come back to my own personal story, I'll speak to me and then maybe more broadly. I don't think that I was able to recover from my propensity to extreme until I had been on the journey long enough and I could feel like some of my deeper trauma was healed. Because rigidity and extremes can be a survival mechanism from an
Right. A
unsafe
control,
environment.
I
Yeah.
imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. In an unsafe environment, whether it be drugs and alcohol, or even in an unsafe food environment, if someone has challenges that makes it feel like there's no real option other than to be extremely rigid and to really get committed to something. By the way, cognitive rigidity is not necessarily synonymous with commitment, dedication, devotion. They have a lot of overlap, but cognitive rigidity is more of like a mental state that is characterized by inflexibility.
Right. It's
And
prohibitive to one's life, not like a good rigidity.
yes,
Not
it's like,
discipline. Yeah.
but like in many ways, right? Like in a
Huh?
military context, being cognitively rigid is a celebrated attribute. You know what I mean?
It's a necessary or you're out.
Yes. And if you look at like the people that are like celebrated and revered in society, if you look at like the David Goggins and the people that people really just want to be like, these are people that carry the message of, extreme commitment, cognitive rigidity, right? Like you do it no matter what. That kind of content people really gravitate to. I think a lot of people wish that they had a little bit more discipline, but I think as you mentioned, when it becomes like a rigidity that doesn't leave room for other options, that's when it affects, quality of life. So
I
yeah,
got
that's
I
my
got
take.
rigid once about I got like kind of addicted to swimming once. And I mean, I've been a swimmer forever, but like I was so addicted to it at one point that it's like going a day without it was like hell. And like I went to Europe once and I was like, how am I going to swim? And
Yep,
I broke into like, hotel pools to try to get like a swim in their stupid pool, like 2 laps. Like I just, and then at one point I'm like, what am I doing? This is
that's right.
becoming prohibitive to everyone's life, including mine.
That's
Like,
right.
what is going on here? Like, I've got to just take a step back. And it was something that actually is quite awesome for you.
Yeah, I had similar stuff in my story. And so, it's so interesting that we're talking about this because I like to think about a big part of the work that I do with people in one-on-one counseling is sort of addressing their continuum of, cognitive fluidity and cognitive rigidity, right? Like that's a big part of health psychology that I think a lot of people don't assess or incorporate. Someone, for example, with an eating disorder history, might be really drawn to a rigid approach to eating, but would benefit from a much more flexible model, right? With much more flexible language. And then there's also people that have been just too free flowing, too easygoing, that need more structure. And so, yeah, everyone got a different psychiatric and psychological profile that would benefit from different language that incorporates how rigid or how flexible someone is. And I think that's such an important piece that will be a very positive predictor of successful treatment outcomes.
So, changing name, age, gender, whatever, can you tell us of a few 180s of people you've coached over time, things that really stand out? I know I'm sure there's many, but the ones where they thought there's no way this is possible, I can overcome this, and they did.
Yeah, I actually have had quite a few recently, um, because I put a lot of my philosophical teachings and my nutrition lessons into video form and have attached assignments to them that are really designed to help someone create their own plan. It's digging deep, and this is what I built in the Wise Mind Nutrition app. It's really not a place where I come in as the doctor expert and tell people what to do. It's a place where I'm providing education to like ask someone to take a look at themselves and do some assignments and basically create their own plan based on guiding principles. And so I actually only released it a few months ago, and I've had a lot of people finish the modules thus far. And I've had people that have had 40 years plus eating disorder history get into a entirely new chapter. And I obviously am thinking of three case studies, three women that I worked with in the last few months, that did the Wise Mind Nutrition app alongside working with me in counseling. So that's the kind of full committed approach. But yeah, I think that food is part of it. You know, for some people with eating disorders, there needs to be a lot of focus on food, what to eat, when to eat, how to eat, how much to eat, possibly looking at things like food quality, etc. And then for a lot of other people, it really is just about challenging old ideas. You know, some people just internalized weight stigma at a young age or came in with, strong assumptions about how they were supposed to look, how they were supposed to eat, and just have such rigid adherence to an old set of beliefs that is completely preventing them from having a new experience with food and with their body. So, within a few sessions, sometimes I'm able to help someone identify what is all the stuff they've been carrying with them since their teenage years and before, and then discard some of those and start to replace them with some new ideas that are grounded in reality. You know, the truth is like science is different in 2024 than it was in 1988. You know, and not just science, but the world, right? The environment's different. The microbes that live inside of our GI tract are different. You know, our brains, the human brain is different in 2024 than it was in the 80s and the 90s. Like there's a rapidly changing world, and sometimes people have a hard time adapting to it and are stuck in old ways, old ideas. You know, I did this diet, 20 years ago, and I felt great. This was my exercise routine before I got married. This was what this is what I wore to my wedding in 2001. And people get really attached to the yesteryear, and it prevents them from having a new experience with their life. And that's a big part of what I do, is try to look at someone's developmental trajectory and how it all informs their current moment so that we could look forward in a positive and meaningful way.
I love all this. Do you have a few more minutes by any chance? Okay,
Yes.
great. You can work with anyone, anywhere over Zoom, right?
I sure can. I've been very fortunate to work with people from all over the world. As a dietitian in California, I have that privilege.
I love that. So everyone listening, David is there for you on your MacBook, on your iPhone when you need him. And also, before we wrap it up, even though this will be in the show notes, everybody, main website is nutritioninrecovery.com, and the app is wisemindnutrition.com. Correct, David?
That is correct. Yes,
Great.
I have two different places where you can find me. And a lot of the blogs that I've written in the last 2 years are at the Wise Mind Nutrition website. These are blogs at the intersection of nutrition and mental health.
So I want to kind of finish up here by asking you've gone through this journey, which involved a ton of mindset work, a ton of reading, studying, taking tests, papers, graduating, theses, all that kind of stuff. What are some of your favorite philosophers, philosophical teachings, books, things? I mean, obviously, I know it's a long list. I got it, me too. But what are some things that you love, or at times you're like, ooh, that's a good one if people never looked into mindset stuff, or even just a way, not necessarily another author, but just something you like to impart upon people?
Yeah, thank
What are your
you.
wisdom nuggets?
Yeah, you got it. It's funny. It's funny you asked that. I was talking to someone yesterday who asked me if I had read a book, and I just came clean to him and I said, listen, like in the last 10 years, I just read peer-reviewed journal articles,
Right.
and I don't get a chance to read things that are in the popular press the way that I wish I did. I'm kind of foreseeing a time in my life when I could stop reading the estimates of the data and really start reading some more books. But there are several that I like, but I really want to highlight that some of my real academic heroes, some of my source of inspiration are scholars that no one knows about, that
I love
write
that.
You know what I mean? That write journal articles about intersectional mental health issues. So, my area of research has been in ultra processed food addiction, and there is a lot of debate in the eating disorder world. So yeah, there's a handful of psychiatrists, Dr. Mark Potenza, who's at Yale, who was a big inspiration for me early on, just out of the box thinking. My close friend and mentor, Dr. Timothy Brewerton, has done some really good work with trauma and eating disorders. And then there's like a little crew of us who, and this is the nugget, who really praise nuance, really
Yeah.
praise the investigation of nuance and not thinking in binary ways about mental health or about health, but always really trying to investigate where things converge, where they diverge. And this type of thinking is way too complex for social media,
Yes.
and that's where a lot of us run into trouble. We're like, we have all these incredible ideas, but social media just wants what are the top three things? And so, yeah, a lot of this deep searching work and the nuance, that goes on behind the scenes never really trickles down into the mainstream. But yeah, we've got a little crew of psychiatrists and other clinicians that really love thinking in the gray area. And I think that's what we need more of in the world. I think that we've gotten lost in the dichotomania. And if you find yourself in the black and white thinking, in the extremes that we talked about, there are ways to pause and access what we call in DBT, your wise mind.
Mm-hmm. I love it. No, that's so important. And also, I would say, I would want a eating disorder / recovery coach, trauma coach like you because you're still geeking out on this shit. Awesome. That's how my functional medicine doctor is. He's a geek. You know what?
Yeah.
That's who I want helping me with the problem I'm seeking them for because they are still willing to learn, to admit that they might have been wrong or need to look at something a different way, willing to practice something new with you, perhaps. And so I commend you for that. And also, that's great. I love that you still are geeking out and love all of the stuff that you learned and got your PhD in, and you're still kind of on that train. That shows how into it you are and how passionate you are about it. I think everyone can hear that from listening to today, but that's really awesome.
Yeah, I'm still collecting data, still coding, still writing manuscripts, even though I'm no longer at a university.
Well, on our way out here, do you have anything else you'd like to leave our audience before we wrap it up?
I would just like to encourage people to remember who you are, challenge the assumptions that are out there in the world, and always remember to pause when necessary.
I love it. Thank you so much. And for everyone else, we'll see you next week. Hey listeners, over the years, a ton of companies have approached me to collaborate, but I will only promote companies whose products I believe in and that I actually use and consume on a regular basis. So let me tell you about some of my favorite companies that I can offer you discounts for. Rep Provisions, an amazing company doing incredible things for our planet, topsoil, and animals with regenerative agriculture, and it's my #1 source for quality pasture-raised meat and chicken. Visit repprovisions.com and use code L15 for 15% off. I'm also obsessed with a company called Carnivore Crisps. They make a lean, all-natural, and delicious alternative to conventional snacking, made with just real meat and real salt. Totally addictive, and my favorite ones are the beef brisket and the ribeye. Visit carnivorecrisps.com and use code PALEO10 for 10% off. I also love and regularly use Paleo Valley products. They make amazing supplements and delicious paleo products. I use the superfood greens powder, grass-fed beef sticks, the organ complex, and their bone broth bars. I love the lemon and apple. I also use their essential C complex and more. Visit paleovalley.com/promos/Elle Russ for 15% off. I also love Primal Kitchen. They make delicious paleo-approved, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and no refined sugar products. And I use them daily, from their collagen powders and sauces and marinades to their avocado and olive oil. So good, so healthy. Visit primalkitchen.com and use code L10 for 10% off. I also love paleo powder and use it almost on everything I cook. They make incredible seasoning blends, and they also have these incredible grain-free coatings that feel just like crispy breadings that you would have had prior to knowing that there's another way. So visit paleopowder.com and use code L15 for 15% off.